Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone. This is a meeting of the City of St. Louis Citizen Advisory Committee for Capital Expenditures, and today is Wednesday, October 19th. Thank you for attending. I know we got some late additions to the committee, and so we may be joined in progress, or you'll have to be joining in subsequent meetings. Just some primers. I know some of you had served on last year's committee, and there may be some new faces as well. So I wanted to go over a little bit of some primers about the role of the committee itself. The Citizens Advisory Committee for Capital Expenditures is just that, an advisory committee to the city's capital committee, which is a 9-member board consisting of representatives from the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, as well as a couple of members from the Board of Aldermen, the Director of CDA, and total 9 members. And then that committee is also an advisory committee, or makes recommendations to both the elected officials in the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, as well as the Board of Aldermen, for ultimate appropriations for capital expenditures. So there is it's a process we go through. It's almost, as with the regular budget, it's like making sausage, and sometimes, and where you're trying to get ideas from all sources, and then you put together a package, which ultimately the decisions are made by the elected officials. So this process is one where we're out trying to assess what our capital needs are, as well as get advice from you as citizens from the committee to address any needs that you see that might not be addressed in some of the recommendations. I am Paul Payne. I'm the city's budget director, and I serve as chair of the city's capital committee. With me this evening also is Rich Bradley, who's president of the Board of Public Service. And for those of you not familiar with the Board of Public Service, they are the chief engineering office for the city, and they are tasked with identifying the inventory of capital needs for the city. Rich has been instrumental in both getting those lists together and creating cost estimates for the same. We are also, as the needs arise, communicate with the various operating departments as Rich works closely with them, but there are some areas of expertise, particularly streets and parks, which we may bring in to have discussed projects in particular. A couple things, just some housekeeping. Last year we did go through a lot of departments. We went through over 3 months of meetings. I don't anticipate to rehash a lot of that. I would like to go in and discuss some of the newer items that might be added to the inventory since then and what we've accomplished to date. And so I would anticipate maybe a month and a half of meetings on a weekly basis. And if this is a good time, that would continue it at 5:30 on a Wednesday. That would work. We could reschedule if that creates a problem for a number of people, but that's what we're looking at. I would also like to respect people's time, have these meetings limited to an hour and a half or so, because I just want to make sure people can plan their lives accordingly. And I appreciate everyone's time in these. Also, for communications during the meetings and for purposes of record keeping, I would appreciate when we do have questions and answers, you use the Q&A function, which I believe communications is activated, so that sometimes we have a meeting that goes longer and we're not able to address all the questions. At least we've got a record of those, and we can respond in writing to those questions as we go along at future meetings. So at least we will have a record of those so we don't lose them. The chat is there, but we also want to make sure that any questions are submitted in the Q&A section. Okay, with that, I did want to, for those who were, again, were here last year, this might be redundant, but I did want to address some of the basics about capital budgeting and planning that the city does do, and go over some of that. I'm going to share screen now, and hopefully you can see all of this as it comes online. What I have before you is a document. It's actually a link to a document that I had sent earlier in your emails, introductory letter emails. This is a document basically summarizing the capital improvements budget and process for guide, and specifically for FY23. But many of the processes are on annual basis. Hopefully you've had a chance to review this. It discusses a lot of the process for capital budgeting and planning. The capital, again, highlights the members of the capital committee, some of the priorities and established criteria for evaluating those projects as they're proposed. It lists, just gives a summary list of all the assets that exist scattered throughout the city by various categories, including everything from civil buildings and civic centers, fire department, police, corrections, parks, streets, including the streets and dumpsters and all those variety of assets. And then equipment services, we have a lot of costs with fleet and such, and then some of our other civic and other municipal buildings. So you'll see as we go through discussing some of the needs and the capital needs that Rich was going to describe, it falls in one of these various categories. And so some of these needs are quite entailed and vast. So you can see that the city's inventory of capital assets is quite substantial. Just to give you an idea about the normal budgeting process, we do have a capital budget each year consisting of some various limited sources of revenue. The biggest source being the half-cent sales tax for capital improvements that was approved in August of 1993. This year's estimate of FY23 is totaling $20.1 million or $20.2 million. That source of revenue is allocated by ordinance, with 50% of that allocation going to the ward capital improvements, and then other slices that you can see from the graph, and I'm going to enlarge it here, so as I'm sure you're straining to see it. 20% going to citywide accounts, 17% going to major parks, 10% going to the police department, and 3% going to rec centers. Now, I should point out as we discuss this, and you'll see later as we talk about allocations, a lot of this is limited. I mean, one is specified by ordinance about how it should be used. And also, you'll see it when we get to citywide accounts, that a lot of that is already allocated towards existing debt service. So on an ongoing basis, there are limited discretionary sources. We'll get into a minute about some of the additional sources we're going to be talking about, which is the focus of our committee meetings. You can see in addition to that, we also have the Metro Park District sales taxes. This is 1/10 of a cent that was approved in November of 2000 and 3/16 cent approved in 2013. The city receives 50% of the 1/10 cent and 40% of the local city parks of the 3/16 cent, with the remainder going to the Metro Parks District. And so you can see those amounts at $1.9 million and $2.8 million respectively. Some other recurring sources of revenue we have typically for the capital fund, 1/2 of any operating surplus in the prior fiscal year. We'll be discussing that in a moment. Sale of any city assets that were not planned in FY23. We have some courthouse restoration fees, which by statute goes towards some of the debt service on the existing courthouses. A portion of the gaming revenues, some of our gasoline tax revenues, which went up this year because of the increase in this and the gas tax statewide. Some general fund transfers, which subsidize some of our lease debt agreements. Some of our Muni Garage and Central industrial rent revenues, which pay off some of the debt associated with those facilities. And then a 10% share of the half-cent economic development sales tax. And so the total sources of revenue for the FY23, the regular source of the capital, were $37.4 million. And then I should point out that you'll see that, and as Rich can describe, many of our street and bridge projects are federally funded, in which we get a 4-to-1 match or a 3-to-1 match. And so oftentimes and you'll see that in our criteria, we often look towards maximizing whatever the feds have available so that we can get the biggest bang out of our buck for funds that we can get for matching grants. Some of the other sources of capital improvement funding that aren't part of our regular capital budget include general obligation bonds, and we'll be talking about that in a bit. We have a currently existing outstanding debt, which we're going to be paying about $7.1 million. But there is anticipated, if you recall, in April, we approved the the authorization of up to $50 million in new GO bonds. That is going to be in tranches because we're basically going to be using existing debt levies as they expire to issue new debt. And so it's anticipated that this first tranche will be in the probably in the first part of next year, maybe between $15 and $20 million. So that's something that we can look forward to. Although again, with GO debt, which is our general obligation debt, you are limited to what you can finance with that. And it's usually the maturity of the bonds are usually around 20 years. So the lifespan of that, the asset funded with GO bonds should be at least that much. St. Louis Works is a street paving program that's appropriated separately. It's about $5.1 million per year. That is one that has not come through the capital committee, but it's appropriated usually in the beginning part of the year from the St. Louis Board of Aldermen. So if you'd like to ask your alderman where those funds are, those are appropriated each year through a separate appropriation. So that is used primarily for neighborhood street paving as well as the sidewalk 50/50 program. We also have some 1/8 cent sales tax for local parks and recreation that are appropriated each year. Utilize a source of funding for the rec center debt as well as subsidizing some of the recreation programs. And then we have something called this Convention and Tourism Fund, which includes restaurant gross receipts tax of 1% and a 3.5% gross receipts tax on hotels that by state statute is allocated towards the convention center debt payments. And so that offsets part of our debt for convention center purposes. Now, in terms of uses of our capital improvement budget this year at $37.4 million, again, a lot of our citywide lease debt financing agreements of $10.7 million. And I won't go through every one of them here, but you can see Carnahan Courthouse, we have existing debt of $2.2 million. We have also a lot of rolling stock debt, meaning that's lease purchase debt for recurring replacement of our fleet. That adds up to about $2.6 million this fiscal year. We also have some debt on the 1520 Market building that paid both for the improvements to that building as well as some NGA site preparation debt, collateral for that debt, which is being actually refinanced. And there was a financing, I believe, which closed today, which defeats that debt and which is going to enable us to fund projects around Cass Avenue and the NGA project. And the NGA project financing agreement, which continues at $1.5 million in this year's budget. Juvenile Detention Center also has outstanding debt, as well as the refuse and fire garage facilities. And then we do have some qualified energy conservation bonds outstanding with some smaller amount due there. So total debt service on those items would be $3.2 million. Other than the debt service, we did have a little discretionary funds here for building repairs, road and bridge projects, ash tree removals, which is a ongoing allocation for funds to remove the ash trees from the city's inventory of trees as they're being decimated by the emerald ash borer, some information systems network equipment, and some various circuit courthouse repairs. And there's also each year allocated to both streets and BPS about $1.3 million per year for engineering and design for the streets and cost of engineering. That's set by ordinance and it comes out of the 1/2 cent sales tax. As I mentioned, the ward improvements get 50% of the sales tax receipts, and they are allocated as well at $2.8 million. And also in that major and parks and neighborhood park improvements, remember I mentioned there was, they got 17% of the sales tax, the 1/2 cent sales tax, as well as a portion of the metro and both 1 10-cent and 3 cent, 16-cent metro park sales taxes. And you can see those amounts listed there. And all the allocations listed. A couple of these are in addition, also determined by ordinance with allocations determined by the Parks Committee of the Board of Aldermen. And then the 3% share of the 1/2 cent sales tax also goes to rec center improvements. So these are recurring, this is a recurring source of revenue for those improvements as well. That's about $640,000. Actually, it's around $500,000, but we did have a surplus each year. Sometimes when the sales tax falls short, we would have a deficit and you'd have to make that up. Sometimes when the sales tax comes in addition, we've got the regular allocation, plus we appropriate that surplus in the following year. And so that's what that includes. And police capital improvements, the 10% share of that also goes to this 0.5-cent sales tax for capital goes to the police department, the bulk of which is for the existing bond issue of 1.6 million. There is an additional $500,000 this year for capital fleet. So that is this year's regular recurring sources. Now, when we went through this process, and I'll lay out, this also lays out from the recurring sources, the 5-year capital improvements plan, just using those sources and what those would look like going forward. Some of the debt service costs falling off, some of the revenue, of course, also falling off, but then other sources increases, for instance, with the new source, particularly with the gasoline tax, et cetera. Now, we also, as we do this, we look at longer term capital improvement needs. And we've been addressing some of these with GO bond issues in recent years. We did one we did an assessment of capital improvement needs, which Rich's office was instrumental in putting together. And in 2014, we went through that process. We had a large proposed GO bond issue that actually which failed back in 2014, but subsequently in 2016 and 18, we had smaller GO bond issues of $50 million and $25 million respectively that did was approved by voters. And then so we've been spending those funds, and those are almost all spent. But as I mentioned, there was a subsequent authorization this fiscal year for $50 million, and that will be issued, I believe, early next year. And it's going to be in tranches, of which you're going to be looking at $15 to $20 million to allocate. But also, in addition to the GO issue, we had 2 other sources. I mentioned that anytime we finish the fiscal year with a surplus, by ordinance, 1/2 of that operating surplus is allocated to the capital fund, which is a good policy because you don't know whether you're going to have a surplus each year. And so when you do have it, that's a source to use, and we use it for those one-time purposes. And then also we had ARPA. Now, ARPA, as you know, has been the city has received just under $500 million in allocation, and there's been a lot of allocations up to this date, over $200 million so far. And then a portion of which was allocated towards capital funding. And so we started this process last July. We had a series of meetings over 3 months, both the Citizens Advisory as well as the City Capital Committee. And we made some recommendations as a result of that. We went through a lot of the department hearings. You can see some of those. Those are still posted on the website if you're interested. We had conditions at city bridges. We talked about rec centers. We talked about fire department equipment, et cetera. And ultimately, there was a package that was recommended from that, which can also be found online. Now, we went through that process. The Board of Aldermen actually took up that proposal in February of earlier this year. They did have some amendments to that, which then finally was approved in April of 2002 as Ordinance 71494. And this was actually the old map. I believe you got the updated map, which I also sent, which describes how those projects were funded, at least on just so you can see it geographically. And so that's what brings us to today. And let me see, stop share. And so where we are today, we do again have operating surplus from last year, just slightly under $25 million, which is $24.7 million. We will have the GO bond issue, which again should be between $15 and $20 million. That hasn't been totally identified, but it also depends on interest rates, which are in flux right now. And then we also have another piece of ARPA that we'd like to appropriate for capital. And again, that amount hasn't been set yet. But before we get there, I do want to get Rich an opportunity to just sort of update us where we are on the status of the current capital appropriations. And Rich, I can pull up, let me see, I can pull up Exhibit A from the Board Bill 184, and just sort of as a talking points, just to bring everyone up to speed on
Great.
that, if I could, and I'll share that with you.
Do you also have the floor substitute that was added to Exhibit A?
This should reflect everything in the exhibit.
Okay, great. Thank you.
It's got those additions. It's got those additions that were made at the board.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Rich Bradley. I'm the president of BPS. What I'd like to do now is just take a few minutes to walk through the exhibit that is on the screen. This is the result of Ordinance 71494, Board Bill 184 that came out of the last set of deliberations, the recommendation of the Capital Committee, and the approval of the Board of E&A and the Board of Aldermen. So, excuse me, I'll just take a minute to walk through each one of these and give you a brief snapshot to tell you where we are on these, so you have an idea that process is moving. So these were in categories. We'll start off with category A, the Tucker Cycle Track, which was a grant project, a transportation alternative program grant project that we had. We picked up the local match share in Board Bill 184, and currently we are issuing a notice to proceed to a design consultant to design that project. Excuse me. The LED streetlight conversions for $4.2 million was a project to complete the remaining streetlight heads to LEDs in the city. And we are currently issuing the design work and putting together a bid package to bid those out to a contractor to install those. The refuse trash task force camera upgrades for $1 million. The police department has worked with the refuse department. They've completed testing cameras, and they are currently in the process of bidding cameras through the supply division. Thank you. All right, so then we drop down to arterial street paving. And so the original projects that were on there for Union, Enright to Florissant, Grand, Holly Hills to Hall Street, Kings Highway, Gravois to Florissant, and Jefferson from Chippewa to Shoto. We have an RFQ, which is a request for qualification out on the street to hire a consultant. Look at those corridors to do traffic calming, as well as working with the street department to get together a paving program in conjunction with these projects. Now, I am going to make the comment because I know David Newberger is on the call, and David's been working with us as well, that we are also looking at some additional funding through other sources to complete additional American Disabilities Act requirement work, which could be sidewalk, could be curb ramps, could be raising curbs, things of that nature to go along with that work as well. The next project that was added through the floor substitute for arterial street paving was Goodfellow, and that project is also included in the project that I previously just talked about. The next project is traffic calming from I-70 to the Riverview Circle, and that is actually a MoDOT project. And so what has happened is we've worked with Missouri Highway and Transportation Department on a traffic study on West Florissant, and we are going to provide them with the match funds from this amount to build and perform all the traffic design and build all the traffic calming within this corridor. The next project on the list is curb work, and that was also a floor substitute from Kings Highway to Dr. Martin Luther King. And we are currently working with the street department and the alder people of those wards to determine the exact scope of work, and also determine if there are alternatives to either milling or replacing curbs or raising curbs, whatever we need to do in the most economical fashion to get curbs to their proper height and keep vehicles in the street right away. The next projects that are shown on the list are median repairs, and there are 4 of those. Again, those were floor substitutes. from Kings Highway, I-70 to West Florissant, Goodfellow from Natural Bridge to I-70, Natural Bridge from Salisbury, Marcus to Salisbury and Parnell. And we are currently working, my department is working with the Parks Department on scoping out those projects to determine what the actual need is. As again, it was a floor substitute by the Board of Aldermen. It was something that was added without a lot of input from the Board of Public Service. So we're kind of working backwards, if you will, to determine what exactly the needs in those areas are. Is it grading? Is it the planter boxes? Is it the curbs? Is it the landscaping? There are a number of things that we will look at in those areas. And then the final floor substitute was a sprinkler repair, and that is also in the medians in the major street arterials. And again, we're working on scoping the projects out with the Parks Department. As we skip down to category B, that is bridges. If you were to look at the original plan for bridges, there were 3 bridges that were in there: Compton over Mill Creek, Lindell and Union over Forest Park Parkway, and Lindell and Union over Metrolink. Those were local match shares to federal grant projects that Paul had referenced earlier. We put up 20% of the funding. The feds put in 80% of the funding, and we have 100% project. And so those projects, those 3 projects are underway. They were removed by the floor substitute to do the items that I previously talked about. But those are items that are going to be critical for consideration as we move forward and look at dollars and for capital expenditures, because we have active grants that are currently designing and acquiring right away for both of those projects. And so we need to restore those local match shares. And then finally in the bridge category is bridge repairs. And that project currently, we have determined the scope of work and cost estimates for the repairs to 9 bridges, and they're in various stages of design and construction at this time. As we step down to category C, which is Parks, Recreation, and Forestry, the first item on the list was Recreation Center boiler replacements. There was an estimated 12 of 30 boilers. What we did was we looked at the boilers at the rec centers in this order, replacing boilers at Wool, then Tandy, then 12th and Park, then Cherokee, then Marquette, and then West End Rec Center. And we came up with a total dollar amount. We were about $67,000 short of replacing all the boilers in those facilities. But currently those boilers all have work orders that are in process. The equipment is being ordered for all but the West End, and we will be in process of replacing those boilers when the equipment comes in. The next item on the list was pool renovations, 1 of 7 for $1 million. The Parks Department is still finishing up assessments, and then they're going to work with BPS on the bidding documents. What it appears to be is that we will do multiple repairs on multiple pools, critical repairs on a couple pools as needed to start that work off. And then we will put the balance into the pool that needs it the most. And then there'll be additional item on the capital for this year for additional pool repairs. The next item on the list was rec center roof replacements. And so we're currently preparing the bid documents. They're underway, and we expect to be bidding those projects shortly after the beginning of 2023. Tree removal, hazardous safety. Forestry is actively removing trees with this funding. They have just started this, so they are probably less than 10% spent out on this fund, but they are actively utilizing this funding. As we go to category D, the fire department buildings and equipment, the firehouse roof replacements, bid document preparation is also underway there, and we anticipate to bid those in the spring of 2023. The Magna Grip exhaust system, which is the repair of the vehicle exhaust system and various firehouses has been scoped out at all the individual stations. The walkthroughs and proposals are in, and we are issuing work orders to repair those items as well. There's a list of fire department vehicles on here. I can tell you they are in various stages of specification and order. We've received some of the bids. Chris Amos is on the call with me as well. I do want to state that, you know, I think we all understand the economy has skyrocketed. Some of our bids have come in over what the estimated costs were. And so we are in the process now of working with the fire department to, you know, reprioritize what we need. Obviously, ambulances and fire trucks are of critical need. So we will buy as many of those as we can. And again, Chris is on the call. He's the Commissioner of Equipment Services. If there's any specific questions about those vehicle purchases, Chris can handle those after I get finished here. We step down to category E, which is the police department buildings and equipment, the elevator equipment, the work authorization, developing scope of work and specification, and bid packages for the elevators is in progress. And we are going to issue notice to proceed to the elevator consultant by the end of this month. Once the design is completed, we will bid those projects out and get that work done. I would anticipate it would be the lead time on those elevators has been anywhere between 4 and 6 months. So probably by the end of the next fiscal year or the next calendar year, we would be finished with that work. The next item on the list is the Academy Stone Facade tuck pointing work. The work has began and is currently about 60% completed. St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department vehicles, $3.4 million is ordering 1/2 of inventory of the Scout vehicles that were in need. I believe that is somewhere in the neighborhood of about 80 Tahoes. We were waiting for the new model year to come out so we could issue that that RFQ, our requisition. And again, Chris could tell you exactly where in the process that is, but as soon as the opportunity arises that we can do that, we will issue that requisition and buy those vehicles. And then finally in police, the match for the police foundation was $150,000 from the city for a $1 million match share from the police foundation. It was to do complete renovations interior at the North Patrol, Central Patrol, and South Patrol stations. The North Patrol station is fully completed. The Central Patrol station is about 65% completed. And when that is done, then they will move to the south and complete that. As we move to category F, which is corrections and other public safety, the City Justice Center, which has been a big topic of discussion, is about 70% completed. We're still moving through that project, replacing doors, locks, and all the security systems. And that project is anticipated to be completed in about June of 23. The next project is the Public Safety Answering Point 911 Center. Currently, we have partial funding for this project. The phase 1 design is underway, and we should be finishing the design work in about the 4th quarter of 23. Now, the question becomes the issue becomes that we need to find the additional funding for this project in order to construct the project. And currently the project is estimated right at about $40 million. Other municipal buildings and equipment, G, the Carnahan Courthouse air handlers. The scope of work has been completed for the replacement of 9 fan wall units, 9 existing fan walls, and related electrical work. And that work has been completed, and the work orders to do the installation are in process. The juvenile court plumbing upgrades, the scope of work for the completed replacement of the first water main to the building has been completed, and the work orders for that are in process. The medical examiner asbestos abatement comprehensive asbestos abatement and clearance, third-party air monitoring and EPA certified laboratory testing are completed and within budget. The thermal piping installation replacement scope of work has also been identified and bid. Miscellaneous building repairs. This is, and I'll just refresh your memory or bring you up to speed. This is an amount that is put in place for building repairs that are not known, that come up, that pop up every day of the week. It could be a roof leak. It could be a water line break. It could be an electrical issue, just about anything related to any of the city's buildings. And I will tell you that to date, all $750,000 has been encumbered from this item, and the repairs across the city, multiple repairs have been completed. I would say probably about 35 to 40% of the work is done and billed out. I would tell you that about 25 to 30% is in process, and the remainder is on the schedule to be completed. The City Hall fire alarm system, the scope of the work of the building-wide comprehensive, fully addressable fire alarm system has been fully qualified and quantified. A notice to proceed has been issued. The electrical contractor has been mobilized and has completed a building survey. The initial work to be installed is new conduit runs and cabling through the building. That work is scheduled to begin in November, and the project duration is 24 months. The municipal garage repairs, we're currently working on a couple of bid packages for concrete restoration repairs, as well as plumbing repairs. The central industrial roof project, we are currently working on a design and a bid package. And again, we estimate that we will bid that work in the spring of 23. To date, there is still discussion concerning the telecom system replacement for $2.5 million. There has not been a determination on what direction we're moving on that yet. It is an active discussion, but to date, there has not been a decision made. So there's not been any expenditures of that fund to date. And then finally, category H, which is city vehicles. And this is non-police, non-fire, non-emergency vehicles. So for the refuse, streets, forestry, parks, and others, we have put out a number of requisitions from our vehicle inventory survey, starting into this $9 million, working from the most critical down the list. Again, Chris is on the call. If there's any specific commentary about vehicles or vehicle types, Chris could certainly help me addressing those questions. And then refuse trucks. This is another topic that has been big in the news, and there's been a lot of discussion about with the street department about types of refuse vehicle to be purchased, in particular with reference to alley dumpsters and alley carts, availability of trucks, being able to keep trucks maintained and operational. So to date, that discussion is underway, but we have not moved on ordering any of those vehicles at this moment, pending the outcome of change and discussions that may ensue. So I know that was a very quick run through. We don't have a lot of time here, but I would certainly be more than glad to answer any questions on any of those specifics items. I think what I really want to show everybody is that we hit the ground running. We were allocated the funding. The next day we are sending these tasks out to our division saying we need to get moving on spending this money, and we are moving on spending this money.
Yeah, thank you, Rich. And yeah, and I'd also like, before we delve into the updated version, this is just to get you up to date on where we are, both in the capital budget as well as what we've done so far. So if there are any questions, let us know. I did see, is the Q&A not working? I see, Wally, you had mentioned that. I'd ask communications to check into that if that's the case. But
there's a fundamental issue. We're all panelists, which we should be, because otherwise we couldn't talk. But
yeah,
panelists can't answer questions into the Q&A. So just something to think about for future meetings.
Okay, yeah, we were trying to one of the issues we had the last time is we were trying to get a record of what those comments were, and I communicated that to communications, and I was told the Q&A was the way to do it. So that's what we were trying to do. But yeah, we can those guidelines you mentioned in the capital fund, those actually were in that exhibit on the capital improvements budget guide. I did a summary of those in there, and they are also online with the capital budget document. But if I could, let me see if I was trying to post them, but I can't do it when I'm with screen sharing. So let me stop sharing for a second. And I'll pull them back up here. Oops. Sure. This talks a bit about the process and those guidelines right there. That's a summary. And then they're also included in the capital budget itself. And that should be included in that email you also received earlier, because that was one of the documents I sent out.
Thank you for that, but I'm not seeing where you posted that. Is that in the chat or?
Oh, I haven't posted the link. Let me.
Okay.
Yeah, I was trying to do that, but I was also sharing screen, so I couldn't.
No
I had
problem.
trouble. I had trouble doing that, but we'll make sure everyone has that.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay. Are there any after this point? Are there any other questions before we get into where we're going from here in terms of the current needs assessment? Yeah, I noticed a comment on the red, yellow, green expenditure success. What we're actually, and again, just tying into your advisory role in the committee, what the charge, particularly with Rich and BPS, is to identify this universe of capital needs and assess a level of urgency to each so that we can address those. Some of those are going to be, particularly if they're public safety related, let's say a fire alarm system or something, those are extremely important that we need to get funded through the recommendations from BPS. But others, as we all mentioned, are those which, given limited revenues, we need to prioritize. And I think your role as members of the Citizens Advisory Committee is basically to provide us with input for things that we may not be considering, or you don't see on the list. You say, hey, how about this you'd like to consider, or a little more detail into those things that we are considering, for you to get a better assessment of those things on the list. And that's what we'd like to be able to solicit from you as members of the Citizens Advisory Committee. And whether it's something that we're not considering, I know one of the emphasis, particularly coming from the mayor's office just recently, is on streets and safety and such things like that. I have asked for the street department to prepare and get ready to prepare a presentation to this committee, as well as the capital committee for presentation in terms of prioritizing additional arterial street paving and what that all entails. So hopefully we'll get some of that information in a future meeting and we can share that all with you. But as we go through some of these needs and such, and it may be some aspect of a project that you may say, hey, what about this, or what part of this project you would have a question about, or some project that's not on the list that you'd like us to consider. Again, it's going to be capital related, but again, we are supportive operations in our role, but as long as it's capital related, we can discuss it. And if we don't have the information for you, we can get someone in here who can. Okay, and just so you know, we will post anything that we present at these meetings. We will post on the website so that all the agenda materials you'll have one place to go to with the meeting posted. Okay. in addition to the letter, in addition to the amount of information we send you prior to the meeting. There was one question, capital purchase includes software data purchases. The ones that we have so far, there is a small allocation for information systems. We have not, we don't have much in the form of data or purchases or software. One of the larger items that we know and we've dealt with in the past few years and we're currently dealing with is a replacement of the city's accounting system, which was a major capital purchase. And so that was addressed through a number of years of capital appropriations. It is both replacing the city's accounting system, the city's payroll system, and including the budget system, which we will be forging through with a new budget system this next fiscal year. So that was that. IT equipment of that nature is usually funded with capital appropriation. Smaller things, as you notice, we did have an allocation for its information systems of $100,000 or so for just day-to-day type replacements and such. But the bigger items we did address in some of the capital budgets from prior years. So I tell you what, so we don't run out of time, let's get into the new list, or the updated list of capital needs inventories. And so as that generates questions, we'll circle back after Rich does his thing on that, and we could follow up with any additional questions. Okay, so let me.
So will you share the capital improvement needs summary, please?
Yeah. Let me pull that up.
Thank you. So the capital improvements needs summary, just to give you a little introduction. Again, some people are here from the last time, so you understand what this is. This is a listing of by category: streets, bridges, parks, fire, police, corrections, other municipal buildings and equipment, and city vehicles, non-fire and police, in the categories of critical, needed, and desirable, and then a total capital needs list for the city so that we could prioritize what the needs are. As Paul mentioned, annually, we gather the needs from the other operating departments as well. And then we work with them to try to prioritize these in a need to get the most critical items taken care of first, as would be the most logical response here when you have limited funding. So the city's capital needs list right now is about $417,584,300. And what I would ask that you do, and for tonight's purposes, is that we concentrate on the critical needs, which are $165,131,000. And so I'm going to walk through each category. I'm going to highlight a few items in each one. There are items that are in the critical category from the last time that were identified and agreed to be critical that still remain, that didn't get funded on the first round of funding in Board Bill 184. There also have been a few adjustments to the list. There may be an item added to the bottom of the list in critical, or there may be an item that was in needed column and slid over to critical in the past number of months. And so if that's the case, I will highlight those as well. I am not going to walk through each one, but certainly if there's any questions on any of them, we can get you whatever information you would like to have to answer your question. So let's go through the streets category first, and I will turn to the bottom of the list. And so item numbers 25, 26, and 27 are three items that I would just like to just talk about for a moment. So item number 25, underground downtown lighting vaults. These are the vaults for the street lighting substations. They are leaking, they're archaic, they are well beyond their useful life. Water runs into them. There are 11 of them. And in order to maintain our street lights, we need to replace those. So they're in the sidewalk, in the street, beneath the pavement. They need to be dug up and replaced. and the estimated cost there is $2 million. Louisiana Com Street Phase 2, Holly Hills to Merrimack. We are currently finishing Louisiana Com Street Phase 1 project. This is the second phase to that project. This is a traffic calming project on a major corridor in South City. This is a grant-funded project with the Biden infrastructure bills that are out there. We're always looking for opportunities, as Paul mentioned, to do match. And so this is one where if we can come up with a match share of about $440,000, we could complete that Com Street project from its limits of Gravois to Holly Hills. And then the final project under streets that I just will highlight real quickly is signal timing and detection. The traffic signals in the city of St. Louis are controlled a couple of different ways. They are either controlled by a CMAC project, which ties them all together and for controlling, and or they have camera or puck detection in the pavement. These detectors go bad. And what happens is we have issues with the signals not operating properly. We have over 600 signals in St. Louis, and we need to make a significant investment in the detection systems for the signal so the timing works correctly. If you'll move to category B, which is bridges.
Hey, Rich, before we jump there, I just wanted to also point out that arterial street paving number, that's the number that we're going to be asking streets to provide some more detail on in terms of how they go about prioritizing. If you remember, we did some north-south arterials. This may also include some east-west ones, but we also want to know how they go about assessing the conditions of the roads and how they go about assessing their priorities in terms of the paving. So we hope to hear from them at a future meeting.
Right, that is a great comment, Paul, that the arterial street paving, the street department, we have penciled in a number. We know there's a significant amount of our arterial street paving needs to be done. We are depending on the street department to fill in the blank and tell us which north, south, east, west arterials need to be done. Thank you. Appreciate that. If we could skip to category B, which is bridges. If we would look down underneath item number 9, which is structurally deficient on system bridges. Number 9 is the Loughborough Bridge over the UPRR Railroad in Cronolette Park. The reason that project is critical is that MoDOT, if you're aware of I-55 South, they are doing infrastructure work along I-55. They are scheduled to replace the bridge at Loughborough and begin in late 23. We believe that we need to coordinate with them because that is an extremely active intersection with the highway, and we need to take our bridges down and replace them at the same time. We are asking for $1 million there that would fund the design work. And then what it would set us up to do is, again, for the Biden infrastructure money, be able to have a shovel-ready project to apply for an 80-20 grant for the construction of the bridge at the same time that MoDOT is doing theirs. Then I will slide down and say item number 10 is also $1 million for the match share for the design. And that is something we would either consider now or sometime in the very short future, but we definitely need to get the design underway. I'm going to slide down to other major repairs. These other major repairs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 through 9, if you will. These are bridge repairs around the city on bridges. These were needed items in the last round. We had more critical bridge repairs that need to be done, but I'm sure, as you can imagine, that when you're reading about concrete delaminating on the underside of bridges, things falling off of overpasses. Recently, there was an article in the news about a lady on 40 that piece of steel fell off a bridge and went through a windshield, wound up in a critical situation. Bridges are a tremendous liability, and so for public safety. And so anytime that we have bridge repairs, whether it's sealing a deck, replacing an expansion joint, whether it's a handrail, it's lighting, it's upheaved pavement, anything along those lines to deal with the bearings or the structure of the bridge, we want to get those replaced, because what happens is the longer you wait, the more they cost. It just creates in the more problems. So that is about $1.65 million for bridge repairs on those various bridges that are listed. Most of them tell you what they are. And there is one that says miscellaneous. And of course, the one that says miscellaneous is a lot of small repairs around our 74 bridges around the city. But if you wanted to get details on that, we could certainly provide that for you. The last one I want to talk about, 9. This is one that you just need to be aware of. We still own a vehicle approach in East St. Louis to the old MacArthur Bridge, which was the old Municipal Bridge, which is now owned by the Terminal Railroad. We own the right-of-way and the bridge approach around Route 3 and Tudor Avenue in East St. Louis. The city of East St. Louis is looking at doing some economic development in that area. And there's also been a lot of conversations there about people trespassing on this very tall and dangerous bridge structure. So we're looking at what we can do. This is a place marker for it. There's a possibility that we may give it to the city of East St. Louis. There's a possibility we may fence it up. There's a possibility we may remediate it and take it down. But it's just a food for thought conversation. It's something that's belonged to us for 100 years. And at some point in time, we need to resolve that issue. If you drop down to C, Parks, Recreation, and Forestry, I think the critical items on this list that we really just need to keep in mind are our leftovers or holdovers from the last time. We still have some boiler replacements in other rec centers that I didn't talk about. And obviously that's important for our residents and the youth programs. We still have pool renovations in the pools, and obviously, again, important for our residents and our youth programs. And then there's also a project on here for Soulard Market, which is the city's market. That is a relatively newer project. A complete renovation of that historical facility is about $7 million. It encumbers a whole lot of issues, whether it be, boilers, roof replacements, electrical wiring, security lighting, roof replacements, softening, bathroom renovations, heaters for the stalls, mold remediation. It's a big, long, extensive list. And if there's an appetite, the Parks Department could probably have a conversation with us and fill us in on all the details and the need for that one. As we move on down to the next exhibit, which is D, that is fire department buildings. Again, there are some leftovers from the last time. There's a full roof replacement at the fire department repair and storage facility for $750,000. That is where, over Engine House 2 and where they store a lot of vehicles and equipment and paperwork and documents. So it's still an active garage storage facility for the fire department. Although we don't fix vehicles there anymore, they utilize the space. That there is a project for the fire department for HVAC and plumbing upgrades and all the 31 fire stations around the city. That there are firefighters that live in 24/7, 365. So obviously we have to have climate control that is operational and proper in those buildings. There is an item for floor replacement in engine houses that was left over. And then there's an item for fire station driveway aprons, which are the driveways which allow the vehicles egress and egress from these buildings, which many of them are in various phases of disrepair from, the weather, from these very heavy vehicles, utilizing them 24/7, 365. And then if we skip down to the vehicles for the fire department, I believe that, what is left here, the most critical item is the purchase of additional ambulances. Again, Chris is on the call, Commissioner of Equipment Services. He could tell you anything you want to know about, the amount of ambulances we have. We have 12 on the street daily. They run the wheels off of those things. They are never off. And so we are constantly replacing that fleet of ambulances. And so what you'll probably say is we replaced ambulances on Board Bill 184, and that is correct. But what we also need to do is not only have a frontline fleet of these, but we also need to have a backup fleet so that the frontline fleet can actually be taken out of service and be maintained once in a while. But again, Chris could answer any detailed questions you have on that. If we look at Exhibit E, which is the police department, we still have one item that was left as a holdover on from the last time that was critical. It was a HVAC system on the 7th floor of the old police headquarters building. It is the HVAC system that keeps the radio equipment for the entire St. Louis Police Department cool during the summertime. Now, if we move to the PSAP facility and we move the radio tower, that will all be retrofitted there. But since we are a couple of 3 years away from that, we still need to keep that equipment cool in the summertime. And so that upgrade there would take care of that. Now, there are a number of other items for the police, but buildings, but they are not critical at this moment. If we move down to the police vehicles, I believe that the other portion of vehicles that we're talking about that are critical today, it looks like we have some detectives vehicles, and what we're looking at is replacing those with some type of electric hybrid type SUV. And we move on to F, which is corrections and other public safety. We have a number of different items that were leftovers from the last time. We still have a fire alarm system upgrade at the Criminal Justice Center, a roof replacement at the Criminal Justice Center. We still have the public safety answering point, which I talked about. We have funded the design for, but we still need to make up the balance in order to build that $40 million facility. Just a real quick snapshot of that. That's a proposed 17,000 square foot, one-story facility at Jefferson and Cass. It would go behind the fire department headquarters. It would be the primary answering point for 911 for fire, police, EMS. It would also have a section for Citizen Service Bureau and an emergency operations center for any kind of public disaster that happened in the city of St. Louis. Underneath the SEMA, which is the City Emergency Management Agency, there are a few items there. There are there's a video wall. There is an IA radon replacement, which we could get a presentation from SEMA on that. But the one item that is on there that I think everyone would recognize is the outdoor warning system. The outdoor warning system in the city of St. Louis are about 60 sirens around. You hear those sirens when there is a tornado, a severe thunderstorm, or anything of that nature. They are outdoor warning systems. They are beyond their useful life. They need to be replaced. They need to be upgraded, and that is about a $5 million item. Now, that system is in addition to other notification systems where your cell phone or your home phone ring. But again, if we so had the appetite, we could have SEMA have a discussion with us about the outdoor warning system. If you'll turn to G, which is municipal buildings, we have a number of things that were left over from the last time. 1520 Market Street, there are still three 600-ton chillers that need to be replaced. They are well beyond their useful life. I would tell you on the 50-year range, we covered this the last time. We cannot get parts for those anymore. We make parts for them to keep them working. We would like to replace those. That is a major office building for the city. We call it City Hall West. A number of offices are in there. So we need to provide proper HVAC. Critical medical examiner, autopsy lighting, that's a pretty small item, but I think it speaks for itself. I think the ones that I would like to just kind of highlight that are important, that need to really be considered, are the civil courts building is a very old facility, somewhere around the neighborhood of close to 100 years old. There is exterior stone stabilization to keep, and tuck pointing work to keep the stonework on the outside of the building from delaminating and falling off the building. It is not at that point now. I will be very clear about that, but we need to do the work to keep it from getting there. There are fire alarm systems at the civil courts building. There's a fire alarm system at the Carnahan Courthouse. Those buildings are very active with the public for jury duty and for administrative functions. And it is something that we need to address for public safety, just like we did here at City Hall, have a fully addressable fire alarm system that operate to protect those people that are utilizing those buildings. If we page down a little further, there are some items for ITSA that are on here. I spoke with the chief in charge of ITSA. She said the biggest critical need that they have is this Hyper-V SAN replacement. I am not an IT person, but again, if there's an appetite, we can certainly have a conversation about that. That's about a $240,000 ITSA item. And then certainly last but not least is Exhibit H, which is city vehicles, which is non-fire and non-police. And so what we've looked at here is about $23,700,000. There are some battery electric vehicles and recharging infrastructure that we would like to purchase. We have purchased some amount already. There are some refuse side loader trucks that we would like to continue to purchase once we determine what the need is and if there's going to be any operational changes there. And then there's about $18.7.5 million worth of public works vehicles and equipment that is less the refuse numbers, other equipment that is needed for the daily operation of the city that is simply due for replacement. So again, I know that was a relatively quick run through. I think I would like to try to answer any questions you have on any of these items.
Thank you, Rich. Yeah, let's, I'm looking at the clock. Let's go to any questions you got on what we either Rich has presented or just in general. I'm working my way also through the chats just in case I missed anything. Again, I'll make sure that every document that we have gone over here this evening will be posted on the website so that you'll be able to access it. Let's see here.
Can someone post the link for that website in the chat?
Sure. I actually, I was trying to do that at the same time. So yeah, let me do that.
And I posted a question in the chat that I can just say aloud.
Okay, sure.
Question for Rich. When you talk about this asset, this list of assets that you just went through, was that manually collected? So people filled out a list on their own, or is there a database of all the city's assets?
So that's a great question. There is a little bit of both. There's a vehicle asset database that we maintain. There's a street asset database. There's a bridge asset database. The comptroller also maintains a record of all the city's assets as well. And we maintain an asset database of all of our buildings. But to be very honest with you, it is not in one database that you can simply go to. So what we do is, that's why we pull from each of the individual departments and we say, utilize the information of the facilities that are under your purview and tell us what your needs are. And then we all work together on it to, formulate this list. So for example, if it's a recreation center, the parks director does not have a staff that maintains that. I do. So they create a list, my staff creates a list, and we all collaboratively look at all these things and work together daily to come up with this. Would it be nice to have one general list? It probably would be, but it's not something that we've actually ever had. Did that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks.
Sure.
Rich, just as a follow-up to her question, is that something that you all may be looking into, just to have something that's consolidated?
So, the hard part of that is that if you had a consolidated database, then obviously you have to have somebody who would maintain that and have all the knowledge over it. It is something that I think we certainly could look at, but I think the problem you would have at the moment is having the proper staffing to keep it up to date. For example, recently, we've been working with David on an ADA transition plan, and we've established a database, or I should say, let's be fair, we're establishing a database on, ADA items that are in the city right away and buildings and facilities. And it has been a mammoth endeavor to do that. So should we work towards it? Absolutely. But it would be a long time in the coming.
Understood. Thank you.
And I posted the link to the budget guide, the capital budget guide that you'll have there. And the documents we've gone over will also be posted on the website, the regular website for city capital meetings. Okay, anything else? All right, hearing none. Again, what we'd like to do in the next several meetings is go over some of these requests in detail. As I mentioned, we do expect to hear from streets coming up. I know we want, there's going to be a lot of emphasis on arterial street paving and street safety initiatives on the capital side. And so we want to hear from them directly and how they identify their priorities and how they go about that. So I would hope to schedule them and hopefully we can get those in by next week. But I haven't seen the details yet, so that's hoped for. And then if there's any other follow-up for some of the ones that Rich didn't have any details are, we can ask other department heads to come in, such as I know Parks Division is a big one typically that generates a lot of interest. We may ask them for some details, more details. And so so we'll proceed with that being the case. The question is how the capital committee makes decision change and what did that process look like? That was before my involvement with the capital committee, quite frankly. So I'm not quite sure, but what I will present to you in terms of criteria, I know you're talking about criteria, is that if you have ideas for that, and actually I've got some thoughts on additional criteria as well. I think that's something that we can, would be proposed at a future capital meeting. I think that's something that the capital committee would take up individually as well. So we could do that. And then Kathy's asking about cybersecurity and such. We can talk about that. Perhaps we could have make a presentation since that would be your area of interest. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Oh, we've got just a couple more minutes. I'm just curious. Are there any plans in this capital expenditure to look at City Hall moving from 28 to 14 aldermen, updating maybe the hall, the Board of Aldermen? I know it's always hard for them to spend money on themselves because it looks bad politically, but that infrastructure is just painfully old, and I'm wondering what we're thinking about that.
That is actually a very good question. And I don't know, Rich, has that come up in your requests?
So it has not yet. You know, it is a wonderful question, and that infrastructure is very old. The only conversation that ever has come up recently about that is air quality in the Board of Aldermen and air conditioning in the Board of Aldermen. Well over $1 million for that, but there's really has been no appetite to say, let's reconfigure the board or let's reconfigure the offices. I fully anticipate though, Wally, that's going to be a future discussion. I think that's a great point.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, I think HVAC in the aldermanic chambers should be a priority because right now they can't meet in person, which I think is not sustainable. And we have an annual aldermanic break every summer, which essentially shuts down all activity for 2 to 3 months. And as someone who, I'm in real estate development, I'm involved with bills, it absolutely shuts you down for way too long.
That is duly noted. And again, another great comment. And yeah, we could certainly, if there was an appetite for the for air conditioning, the Board of Aldermen, and that was the charge that we could do, and the air quality in there, we could certainly do that. There's an opportunity to do it. It's just relatively expensive because of the way the chamber is set up in order to put forced air in there with all the artwork and everything else, but it can certainly be done. So duly noted. Thank you.
I would like to add that I believe that the ADA requires us to spend some amount of money annually on what could be called capital items to eliminate barriers that are otherwise not going to be addressed. And I don't know whether that amount of money would come out of the capital budget regularly or whether it comes out of some other source regularly. But I do think the feds will want to see that we are steadily improving our inaccessible features.
Yes, thank you, David. Yeah, and we sort of briefly chatted a little bit prior to this meeting about that. My understanding, and if I'm wrong, someone can correct me, I thought when we did paving that if in those areas that were being paved, if there was not, let's for instance, not a curb cut done or something like that, in most instances, we would be doing curb cuts when that was done as paving. I think that was the case. We can find out from streets to be more specific, but yeah, I think it's important that when we start talking about street paving and street projects, that we reflect an all-in cost, both that cost as well as the curb cuts and all, so that we know that everything is being addressed when it's being done. And I thought that was the case, but we can, as we delve more into the street projects, we can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, but then it would be the same thing, for example, in the rec centers. There are bad access things that need to be done. They're not part of this planning discussion, but they are part of what the transition plan is going to say that we need to do, which then in turn, in good faith, we have to cut at. And Lord knows, I agree that it's many, many years before all of that is done, if ever. But we have to show a good faith continued expression through dollars, not just through platitudes.
Right, okay. Okay, well, we're just about out of time. I again would like to thank everyone for their participation and their willingness to serve on the committee. Again, this is a deliberative process. We go through a lot of back and forth, hopefully with some of these key issues we're talking about with projects we'd like to see. And you get there through vetting and through a lot of discussion. I think hopefully we can get to some idea about what the priorities are, and we've got some, and thankfully we do have a little bit of leeway into funding these days, so that we can get some of this done where it's been deferred for quite some time. So hopefully we can convene again next week at the same time, Wednesday at 5:30. That works well for everyone. And if in the meantime you want to hear from some other department, please reach out and contact me, and I can put some feelers out, and we can start scheduling some of the other departments. And hopefully we can get some agendas filled and get some project recommendations done in due course. So again, thank you very much. And I think we're done for the evening.
Bye.